Jericho Alley by Lisa Colodny. I hope Miles is able to come today, Jello thought, snuggling closer against the warm leg of his friend Sam. Sometimes on the coldest of days, he could depend on Miles for a warm meal. He and Miles had been friends for a long time, before Sam and the brown truck when they lived with the nice old woman who was sick a lot. After she was gone, their journey along the noisy road led them to Jericho Alley. It's going to be too cold to stay in the alley tonight, Miles warned before climbing into the brown truck. You and Sam should go to the shelter. Sam won't stay there without me, Jello said. He looked curiously at the empty place where Sam had been. Do you know where he went? Miles waved to him. I saw him at the bakery. At the bakery, Jello called to Miss Anna Lee as her car passed by. Have you seen Sam? It's getting colder and I'm hoping he will go to the shelter tonight. Miss Anna Lee pretended not to hear him. She didn't remember her life before she lived with the little dark-haired girl in the big, warm house. Jello barked at the bakery door until it was opened by his friend Nate. Has Sam been here? Yes, Nate answered. Check the alley where the church bus parks. They're giving out blankets. He handed a small bag to Jello. It's not much, but you won't be hungry tonight. Jello made his way cautiously to the darkest part of the alley. Sam? He called. He's not here, a deep voice called from inside a fortress made of wrinkled cardboard boxes. Did Sam come this way? Jello asked his friend Trevor. Yes, Trevor answered. He dropped off some food but left to take the rest to Dame Emma at the library. Jello looked anxiously at Trevor's fake paw. Is it hurting? At first he didn't answer. Instead he arched his back so that the fur wrinkled around his neck like a collar. It's worse when it's cold. You want me and Sam to stay with you tonight? Jello asked. I was a Marine, Jello. I'll be fine. Trevor answered before disappearing into his cardboard shelter. Hope you find Sam before it gets any colder. Jello walked gently down the icy steps to the side entrance of the library. Dame Emma, are you home? I've nowhere else to go, heard a soft voice from under the steps. Jello stepped over several old books and pushed his body close against the wall, away from the cold. You've more books than anyone I know, Dame Emma, Jello said. I loved working in the library with all the children. She smiled. Jello pointed to the crushed bakery bag discarded close by. Did Sam say where he was going next? He said he had to stop at the post office, she answered, looking outside as the snow fell thick on the sidewalk. He was going to stop by that shelter to see if there was any room tonight for you both. Most shelters won't allow pets, Jello said sadly, before adding, Sam won't stay there without me, even though I wish he would. Making his way back towards Jericho Alley, he studied how best to persuade Sam to spend the night at the shelter. He stopped at the corner and watched as the familiar yellow bus made its way towards him until it came to a stop and a little girl stepped off. Are you alone? She asked so faintly he almost didn't hear her speak. Jello watched as the little girl's hands shook, her legs weakened, and she stumbled before finally falling onto the snow-covered sidewalk. Frantically, Jello ran back towards the hardware store where the little girl sometimes played while her father was at work. Jello danced wildly and barked loudly outside the glass door until the man finally followed him from the store and back to the bus stop. Peyton, her father cried out as soon as he was close enough to see her small form lying on the sidewalk. Gently, he collected her in his arms and waved at an approaching police car for help. Thank you, he called to Jello before climbing into the back seat of the car and disappeared. Even though Jello was worried about Peyton, he continued his search. It was getting colder and the snow was getting deeper. He had to get Sam to the shelter for the night. The only place left to look was the post office. Jello squeezed his body through the vent until he popped into the basement of the post office. Within seconds, Daisy was out of her rabbit hole to investigate the ruckus. "Goodness," Daisy cried. "You scared me, Jello." Before he could answer, she busied herself rearranging the photos and trinkets that had fallen to the ground. "Have you seen Sam?" he asked once she finished resetting the pictures. "He mailed a letter to his son in the city," Daisy answered. "The new shelter doesn't allow pets. He was going back to Jericho Alley for the night." Jello slid out the entrance back into the cold. "Make sure you stay inside where it's warm," Daisy smiled, promising that she would. Jello was nearly back to Jericho Alley when he heard Peyton's father call to him. Anxious for news of Peyton, Jello stopped and waited, hoping to learn Peyton was okay. Jello liked the way Peyton's father knelt down and rubbed behind his ears. "I wanted to thank you for helping Peyton," he said. "She's a diabetic and requires medication to control her blood sugar. It dropped too low and made her sick." He pulled himself to his feet. "Because you were there, she's going to be fine." He buttoned his jacket completely to his chin. "You want a warm place for the night, boy?" Jello backed away from him, knowing he couldn't leave Sam all alone. Peyton's father motioned to the warm car parked close by. "Come on, boy," he urged. "It's too cold. Get in the car." From a garage across the street, an older man called out, "I don't think he'll go without Sam." "Sam?" Peyton's father repeated. "Over there, in the alley," the man answered, pointing towards Jericho Alley. Peyton's father followed Jello into the alley. "Sam?" he asked, moving deeper into the alley where Sam was resting under several old, dirty blankets. "How would you fellas like a warm bed for the night?" Jello loved the warm house where he lived with his friends and Peyton's family. He'd never thought of himself as lucky before he knew how richly he'd been blessed. He loved the small bed he sometimes shared with Peyton and the big one where Sam slept. Jello enjoyed helping with the chores for his new family. Dame Emma and Daisy took turns with him, helping change Trevor's bandages and watching over Peyton. He had learned how to predict when Peyton's blood sugar was out of range and barked to alert her parents that she needed help. His life was full with clean, warm beds to sleep in, along with plenty of food to eat and water to drink. He spent his mornings with Sam and his friends from Jericho Alley and his afternoons with Peyton. But his favorite time of the day was just after dinner and the chores were done. He'd sit outside with Sam and snuggle against the warmth of his leg, grateful for all he'd been given. The end.